I hope you can see my screen. So the first concept that we're going to talk about is an apex transaction. All right. What is an apex transaction? An apex transaction represents a set of operations that are executed as a single unit. So when you're writing a program, and through that program you try to perform a few operations, right? So all the operations which get executed as one single unit are referred to as an apex transaction. Okay. So, for example, sorry, yeah. So, for example, if you are trying to perform an insert operation and you're performing an insert for 1000 records, right? So, this insert for 1000 records that you do through one insert statement will get executed as a single unit. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that either this entire unit will get processed or this entire unit will get rolled back. Okay. So if it gets executed, the entire unit will get executed. Otherwise, nothing will get executed. Okay. And this apex transaction concept is very important for the from the DML point of view, data manipulation, or any insert or update in the data which is happening. All DML operations. Now this is important for us. All DML operations in a transaction either complete successfully, or if an error occurs in one operation, the entire transaction is rolled back. I want you to understand this concept. So if there is one transaction, all the DML statements or all the DML operations inside that transaction get completed successfully, or the entire thing gets rolled back. Okay, and no data is committed to the database. So if there is one transaction happening to update 5000 records, and after updating 1000 records it encounters an error, then the records which have got updated, they will also get rolled back, means they will also uh, get into the previous stage. Fine. So that's how a transaction thing works, and this is important for DML operations. The boundary of a transaction can be a trigger, a class method, an anonymous block of code, a visual force page. So these are transactions, the boundary of transactions, like all the code written in a trigger. Okay, this can be one transaction. One class method, you have written methods in the classes, right? So that can be one transaction. An anonymous block of code, if you write anonymous code and try to execute that, that can be one transaction. A visual force page while it is getting loaded, so that can be one transaction. Okay. So it's important to note that all DML statements inside one transaction will either completely successfully execute or will be rolled back. So if you have some records being processed inside a class method, either all of the records will get processed or all of them will get rolled back. Okay, which is a good thing actually. If you think from a developer's perspective, it's going to be a good thing, because say if there is a situation where you actually try to perform an insert operation through program. Okay, and this insert happens for a few records and for few it does not happen. What will happen, at the end of it, what will happen? You will not have a clarity that which records were processed and which were not processed. Correct. So if you think from the point of view of a developer, it's a good thing that if there is an error, the entire thing gets rolled back. So you know that you have to start all, from the beginning again. But if they, if it says that okay, two records were processed and others were not processed, then again you have a challenge in figuring out which records were processed, and make changes in your program and all that stuff. Got it? So this is a good thing actually. All operations that occur inside the transaction boundary represent a single unit of operation. So all the operations inside a transaction boundary are referred to as a apex transaction, and all DML inside a transaction will get executed as one single unit. Okay. Now, how are transactions useful? Why are transactions useful? Why do we have this kind of a concept or transaction concept? It's pretty simple. Transactions are useful when several operations are related. Okay, a transaction becomes important when operations are related. So first advantage of transaction, I told you that it helps you keep the database in a consistent state. So if I tried doing something and if there was an error somewhere, it should actually restore my database into the initial stage. Then it should not make partial changes in the database. Either it should perform all the operations or it should not do anything. Okay, keeps life simple for a developer. So that's one advantage. Let's look into the other advantage also, and try to see how this can be very useful. So transactions are useful when several operations are related, and either all or none of the operations should be committed. Okay. So when there are several operations which are related, and you have a situation where either all of them or none of them should be committed. Okay. This keeps the database in a consistent state. Okay, this will help you keep your database in a consistent state. And there are many business scenarios that benefit from transaction processing. Let's see one of the business scenario and understand how this transaction processing can be helpful. You're trying to transfer funds from one bank account to the other bank account. Take this scenario. Okay. So you have written a method, and in that method you say that okay, deduct the fund from account A and add it to account B. That's it. Okay. Now in this case, this is one transaction, deducting amount from account A and adding it to account B, correct? Now, let's say due to some reason, the first step is deducting the amount, right? It goes deducts the amount from one account. And then the moment it tries to add it to the second account, at that time it finds some error. Okay, there can be some error, maybe some validation is actually causing a problem or some trigger is causing a problem. Due to some reason, it cannot be added into the second account. Now, what is the ideal situation? Ideally, it should go and roll back the first account also. Basically, whatever was deducted, that should not get deducted now, right? So that's the concept here. So if you're trying to transfer fund from one bank account to another account, just this is just an example to make you understand. It involves debiting the first account and crediting the second account, right? These two operations need to be confirmed together to the database, or they need to be committed together to the database. So both these things should be committed at the same time. Got it? Okay. So what we understand is all DML operations inside a transaction get executed as a single unit. Okay. So what are the DML operations? Insert, update, delete, uh, yeah. So these are primarily the DML operations. Okay. Insert, update, delete, and delete. So whenever you have a DML statement inside a transaction, that all the DML statements will get executed as a single unit. Okay. And we saw two advantages, or we also saw a scenario where we realize that how important a transaction can be, the concept of transaction can be, right? But despite all these advantages of this concept, there can be some situations, or there can be certain scenarios where you would want to perform the partial DML. Okay. So generally, if you have a list of accounts, try and understand this. If you have a list of account for accounts, and let's say this is list of 1000 accounts, and you have a statement called update accounts. Okay, so this statement is supposed to update all 1000 accounts, correct? Now if during the processing, once after processing, let's say 200 accounts got processed, and this 201st record had error. Okay, so this update statement will roll back the entire thing. So all these things will also get rolled back. Okay, but they can be certain business scenarios where you would not want this to happen. You would want, there can be scenarios where you would want that, okay, the records which are getting processed, at least let those records get processed, right? So if some record has an error, just skip that record. Okay, so for that there is another way of using a DML statement. So this normal DML statement that we use is always it always works in this way. Either all records will get processed or all records will be rolled back. Okay, so what do we do in case we want partial updates or partial DML to happen? In that case we use database.dml. Okay, so what is database.dml? Database.dml is basically database is a class, predefined class in Salesforce, and there are some DML methods defined in that. Okay, so we have database dot insert, we have database dot update, we have database dot delete. Okay, so this database dot insert is similar to your normal insert operation. Okay, but in the database dot insert, since it's a custom defined DML statement, this has an option of processing partial records as well. Okay, so this gives you an option of processing partial records. By default, this also works on the transaction concept, but here you have the option of processing partial records. So if some records cannot be processed, it will skip those records and process the other records. Okay, so DML statement versus database class method. Apex offers two ways to perform DML operations using DML statements or database class method. So DML statements are insert, update, delete. Okay. The other option is database.insert, database.update, database.delete, those options. Okay. Difference between the two options is that by using the database class method, if you are using the database class method, which is like database.insert, okay, you can specify whether or not to allow for partial record processing if errors are encountered. So that is an advantage here. So if you use a normal insert method, just use insert, then it has a simple logic, either all records get processed or nothing gets processed. You cannot do anything about it. But if you are using database.insert, then you have that option that if you want partial records to be processed, it can do that as well. It can take it up. Got it? So that's important. You can do so by passing an additional second Boolean parameter. If you specify false for this parameter and if the record fails, the remainder of DML operations can still succeed. Okay. So let's understand it here. Okay. So come to this scenario. You have list of accounts. Okay. You can, to update this list of accounts, you can write this update accounts, which is a simple way, or you can write database dot update. Since it's a method, it will be passed as a parameter. Fine. So ideally, functionality of both of them are same, but they have slightly different approach. What will the first one do? If it finds error, it is going to roll back everything. Second one is also going to do the same thing. If it finds error, it's going to roll back everything, because by default it is set to do that. But you have an option of passing one more parameter here. You can write false here. If you write false, then it will allow partial processing. partial processing not allowed, either all records, all or nothing. This one also same thing, partial processing not allowed, but in this case partial processing is allowed. So when you use a database.dml method, basically the database class method, then you have that option of allowing the partial processing. If you don't define anything, then by default it also behaves like a normal update operation. But if you're using the false parameter here, then it will do the partial processing. Clear? Let me know if anyone has a doubt or difficulty understanding this. Okay.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So partial update, is it we have like a last job where you have a different chunk, and if one chunk has bad data, then happen update. Second chunk.
No, your voice is not clear at all. Can you come a little closer to microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now further. Yes.
So it is like a batch job for partial processing. Like you have 10 different chunks, and 9 chunk will run fine, and one chunk you have a bad data, that gonna stop only. But other 9 chunk will run. Is it like that?
No. So there is no concept of batch here. There is this simple concept of oh, microphones on mute, please. So there is a simple concept of that. This batch is again a concept where you have a huge amount of data. You want to process things in bulk or some in batches. This can be a case with 100 records also. In that case, there will be no batches, right? So the concept is that a normal DML statement is always gonna execute completely, or it's not gonna execute any of the records, roll back the entire stuff. A database.dml is gonna do the partial processing, the records which have error. Out of 100, one record can have error. So there is no batch concept here. If one record has error, it will skip that record, it will process rest 99 which do not have error. So that's the thing. Right? Fine. So
Jeet, I have one question.
yeah, just one quick thing before that. So far we knew, I mean, let's make things more clear for you guys. So far you knew that you all only had this option of doing a DML. Any changes you want to do in the database, these are the options. Now you know that you have this option also available. And this okay, and why do I have this options available? Because this option always works with one logic, that either it will process all the records or none of the records. This method is a little flexible, so it gives you the option whether you want to process all the records or nothing, or you want to be you just want to process the partial records, whichever is does not have error, at least process that one. Fine. So just keep this thing in mind. I mean, out of the entire story that we talked about, I think if you just keep this thing in mind, that there is another way of defining a DML statement, and the reason is only this, that you have the option of allowing the partial updates, or partial DMLs, whatever applicable. Yes, someone had a question.
So in the last scenario, the last example, we got error on the 201 record, right? So it will skip the 201 record, and again it will
Yes.
202, right?
Right. So with this statement, the process breaks there itself and it rolls back. It finds error, it says, okay, come, let's go back. Here it is programmed like this, that if it finds error, it skips that record. Okay, fine, let me go to the next record. So that's how it is. Correct?
Yeah.
All right. So this is, DML, sorry, I said database.dml. So there is actually nothing called database DML. These are the methods: database.update, insert, and delete. But sometimes during your interviews and all, you will be asked questions like this. So this, from interview perspective, it is important, and from your generic understanding, definitely from generic understanding it's good, but I don't think how frequently you're going to need this, or when is the first time you're going to need this. But you might need this concept definitely during your interview. Sometimes they ask you question that, okay, when, how will you overcome this, or uh, what is the DML, database.dml, or why is it important? How does it help? How is it different? So this kind of things. Okay. Okay. Now let's come to another concept, which is governor limits. Okay. So before I talk about governor limit, let me just make a few things clear. See, Salesforce is a multi-tenant environment, which means multiple people are using that shared environment, right? The same server, a lot of people are using. Now, when that is the case, it becomes important for them to put certain limitations. So anywhere, you just see, wherever you are sharing something, or you're using a shared resource, you are, you are actually controlled through a certain limitation. If you go and check your Gmail and the Google Drive, you will see there is a limitation of space. You cannot, keep on adding your stuff into that. There's a limitation that they have allowed per person in Gmail. The same way, if you see, let's say, if you are in a multi-tenant apartment, then you actually understand that you have a limitation for certain things. If you are actually traveling in a shared transport, then you will again see that there's a limitation that, okay, when you can occupy this much of space, you can sit in this particular space. So for everything there is a limitation. Same thing happens with Salesforce, because there are a lot of people or a lot of Salesforce.com clients who are accessing the same server. Data is ultimately going to get into the same server, right? So it's important for them to ensure that because of my mistake, other clients are not getting hampered. Okay. So their process or their bandwidth should not get affected because one person is making an error. Got it? So this becomes very, very important. For example, uh, if I am occupying too much of space or bandwidth for the server, then what will happen? Ultimately, their CRM is going to get a hit, right? That is the concept, right? So that's what we have to understand. We have to understand the execution governance and limits. Now, Salesforce, because as I said, it's important for them to put limitations. They put limitation on everything, and they have to. If they don't put limitations, then they will not be able to manage things, right? Because Apex runs in a multi-tenant environment. Okay. Before I get into this Apex color concept, uh, so if you go and check in Salesforce, you will see that there is a limit for everything. How many objects you can create, how many fields you can create, for everything. Okay. How many characters you can write as Apex program. For everything, there is a limitation. Now, for other things, apart from Apex, for everything else, Salesforce imposes the governor limit from their side. For everything else, like for example, if you are allowed to create 10 custom objects, let's say, the moment you create 10, you will not have an option of creating the 11th one. So Salesforce imposes the governor limit from their side. So automatically, the moment you reach the limit, you are not allowed to go beyond that. If your data storage runs out, it will not allow you to store any more data, right? So for those things, it's fine. Now the challenge comes with the program, because while you're writing the program, Salesforce is actually allowing you to write what you want to do. Okay. For everything else, Salesforce has written instructions. When you start writing Apex, you are the one who is writing instructions, right? And when you start writing instructions, then there is a bit of challenge because you might write some instruction which may cause again difficulty to others or may affect the server. For example, you have written a program or you have written a code which is constantly running a loop and it's not the loop is not ending, infinite loop you have started by mistake. So what is going to happen? And that loop is also a heavy loop. And what happens? It's going to affect their server, right? So for that reason, Salesforce actually imposes certain governance limits, and these are important while you are writing Apex. For other things, you don't even have to worry that much about it. But for Apex, because you are the one who is writing, you'll have to keep in mind those governance limits so that your code is written properly. Right? So because Apex runs in a multi-tenant environment, the Apex runtime engine strictly enforces a number of limits to ensure that runaway Apex doesn't monopolize shared resources. Okay, so they want to ensure that some Apex code should not monopolize the resources. If some Apex code ever exceeds a limit, the associated governor issues a runtime exception. Okay, so if your code ever exceeds a limit, it will throw a runtime exception and it will stop executing. Okay, so there is no scope of you actually going beyond that limit. Now, because whenever this will actually exceed the limit, it's going to throw an error. So it's, as a developer, it's important for you to write the code in such a way so that you don't get these kind of errors very frequently. Otherwise, your end users will not have that good experience. If they try to execute the code, and every time it says error, then your end users will not like it because Salesforce has strictly enforced the limits. Got it? So let's look into a few common governance limits and understand how we can actually work with those, and that's gonna help you understand governance limit concept a little better also. So some common governance limits are like uh, this one: total number of SQL queries issued in a transaction. This is in one transaction. We just talked about transaction. Total number of SQL queries which can be issued in one transaction is 100. 100. Now tell me, what do you think? Is it a good limit? I mean, is it a fair enough limit that they have provided us, or does it, look very small? 100 SQL queries inside one transaction.
For me, it is
Sufficient?
very small.
Sufficient? Not sufficient?
It's
For me,
very
it
huge.
is small, not sufficient.
Also, one person says huge, the other person says not sufficient. Okay. So, what is an SQL query, by the way? What's an SQL query?
It's nothing but a simple SQL query.
That query, right? How many queries do you think you will write in one method? Let's say, while we are talking about a transaction, let's consider it as a method in this scenario. In one method, how many SQL queries do you think you are going to write? We have done examples, and how many SQL queries we have written in one method? In our examples, we have written one.
We have used one.
One. Okay. Now, if not one, then how many are you going to use? Two, three, four, five. 100. Now, do you think it's sufficient? Very fair enough, right? 100 SQL queries in one method, who's gonna write? Are you ever gonna write 100 SQL queries in one method? No, right? Okay. But still, people actually face this error, and I will tell you why. Total number of records which can be retrieved by SQL queries is 50,000. So, total number of records which can be retrieved is 50,000. Total number of records retrieved by database.getQueryLocator is 10,000. Database.getQuery locator is the one that we used for batch processing, batch effects. Okay, so that database.getQuery locator can retrieve 10,000 records. Total number of SOSL queries is 20. Total number of records retrieved by SOSL query is 2000. Total number of DML statements issued is 150. Okay. Now again, think about it. What do you think? Number of DML statements 150 in one transaction, is it sufficient or not sufficient?
More than sufficient.
More than sufficient. Because how many DML statements do you think you are going to write in a method? 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 150. 150 is very, very reasonable, right? Okay. But again, this is one area where people usually find errors very frequently. I mean, people exceed this governor limit also very frequently. Okay. So what can be the reason? Anyone? What is the possibility you actually exceeding this? What can be the reason for that?
It's due to looping.
Yes. See, you're never ever gonna write 150 DML statements inside one method. I'm actually assuring you, you're not gonna write. Okay, so you'll not have a requirement where you have to write 150 DML statements inside one method. Usually it doesn't happen. 5, 7. How many update statements or insert statements you will need to perform in one method? Okay, but people exceed this because they put that DML statement inside a loop. The same thing happens with SQL queries. Okay, so let's understand this a little better. How do we overcome this? So these are very common, governor limits, and these are common errors or common runtime exceptions that you will get. So when right now it seems 100 SQL queries before SQL queries. Let's say let's talk about the DML statements. I'll come to SQL query later. Right now it seems 150 DML statement is a huge number. 150 DML statement goes on a write, right? Okay. But let's say you're working with a list of records. Okay. Let's say this is something. So this is a list of records, and there are 500 records here. You have to update these 500 records. Okay. You write program like this for account A, account A in, okay. Now look into this. Let's say if I say if A dot industry equals G, A dot description equals something, I say updated. Okay, so completely a dummy scenario where I'm just trying to take a list of over 500 records, and I am doing a for loop because I need to check some criteria for each record, and then I need to update that record based on that criteria. All right. Now, in this case, if you look into this code, your update statement has gone inside the loop, right? It has gone inside the loop. How many times this loop is ideally supposed to run? How many times this loop is going to run?
500.
500 times. And your DML statement is getting exhausted with every loop. So every time the loop runs, so how many DML statements will be required here? 500. Assuming that all the records are energy, or out of 500, let's say 300 are energy, because DML statement will happen only when if it is uh, energy, right? So let's say out of 500, 300 are energy. So this process, this small process of updating 500 records, or let's say 300 records, is consuming 300 DML statements. Is it a good way of writing? No. So usually people write programs like this. So this is a wrong way of writing the program. Okay. Then what should I do?
Just we can have a select statement.
The option is to bulkify. Bulkify what? Bulkify the DML statement operation. So instead of, see, my DML statements are limited. So why am I updating records one by one? Why am I wasting one DML statement for updating one single record? Don't ever do that. What you should do is define one more list of accounts, updated accounts, let's say. Okay. Do this instead of performing. So this is a blank list, right? It does not have anything. What I'm gonna do, I'm just, instead of updating the things here, I'm just gonna add the values to this updated accounts dot add 8. Okay. So I am just putting that. So this is like a container. Instead of updating the data directly into the database, I'm just putting it into another variable, which is a list. Right? So you just keep on adding this. So this loop runs 500 times, and 500 records get added to your updated accounts, another variable. How many DMLs have we consumed so far? Not even one. My entire loop has got processed, and I have not even not used a single DML. Okay. Now I will just use one DML, date updated accounts. Now I'm able to do it. How many DML statements did you consume by the right approach? One. Just because you did write the program incorrectly, you ended up exhausting your DML statement limits for just mere 500 records. Think about it. If you have 5,000 records to process, then what will happen? Correct. So always bulkify. So the rule of thumb is never ever put a DML statement inside a loop, because loop can run in any number of times. So your DML statements inside loop is a very bad habit. If you have to update records, if you have to run the loop, put those records in another variable and perform the DML after the loop when the loop gets completed. Okay. So bulkify your DML statement. Don't waste DML statement for one single record. Right. And as I said, never ever put a DML inside a loop. That makes that causes a problem. Right. Okay. Now come to okay. The other thing that we were talking was 100 SOQL queries. Okay. Now, since we have seen the DML statement concept, we will understand this also, SOQL queries concept. Okay. Now, the concept is pretty simple again. Am I gonna write 100 different SOQL queries in any case? Very rare. very uncommon. I mean, usually we don't do that, right? But if you put SQL queries inside the loop, then again there is a scope of you making an error there, and you will very soon, exhaust the limit. So let's take one more example. Let's say I have a list of accounts, okay, and okay, think about it. I have a list of account and I need to update all the contacts under those accounts. Now I have a different requirement. Okay. I have a list of accounts. Again, this is a list of say 500 accounts. Now I've been asked that okay, go ahead and update all the contacts of these 500 accounts. Alright. Now you start again with this process for account A in accounts. This is how you will start. Now for each account, you are going to fetch the contacts. How are you going to fetch the contacts? You write an SQL query here. List of contact equals select name email from contact where account ID equals a dot ID, right? And then do something with list. So then you want to process it, delete it, whatever you want to do. Okay. So let's say that is the requirement you have. You have 500 accounts and you have to fetch contacts of all those 500 accounts, and then you should perform some update operation or some other operation on the list of contacts that you fetch. Okay. So let's not focus on that part. Let's just focus on the way you are querying the data. Now what you have done, you have put this inside the loop, the query inside the loop, right? Now again the challenge is that this loop is going to run 500 times. My limitation for SQL queries is 100. Again, the moment this loop runs 100 times, I'm going to exhaust the limit and I will get an exception. Correct? So what is the best way of doing it here? Same concept. Bulkify your SQL query. Bulkify the SQL queries. So try to bring your query also outside the loop. Never ever put the query inside the loop, because if you put the query inside the loop, then again there will be problem. So instead of doing this, what you should have done? You should have written it like this. List of contact, list equals where account ID in. Okay. This query will this if you write this query is gonna update all the records, or sorry, fetch all the records where the account ID is in this list. Okay. So instead of putting the query inside the loop, then you can actually do something if you want for account A and accounts Trying to do here. If there's an update kind of statement, keep it outside the loop. Whatever you want to process inside the loop. You want to check something, you want to go and check whether the contact has an email ID or not or something like that. You can just do that. All right. But what happens here? You have kept your SQL query outside the loop. So you have again bulkified your SQL query. So your SQL query should also not get into the loop, because if it gets into the loop, again you will have the same challenge at the moment, because your loop can run more than 100 times, right? So these limits, if you look into those now, you will realize that until and unless you do not know, or you are making a mistake in taking the right approach for writing your program, you will not exceed the limits. Generally, you don't, if you know the right way. Okay, so these are again very two very common governance limits that you guys deal with. And again, from interview perspective, it's important that you will be asked question that how do you actually overcome this governor limit. So you need to know the answer for both these things. Now let me know if anyone has a question or difficulty understanding this.
Jeet had a question.
Mm-hmm.
What does account where account ID in act? What is the in
See,
query does over there? Like,
ACTS is what? It's a list of records, means collection of values. It's a collection of values, right?
yes,
Which includes the account IDs also. All the account IDs are included in this.
yes.
So that's what you're writing here. That take all the contacts where the account ID, the parent account, is within this list. Okay, so this is one more way of
Okay,
writing SQL query. So if you want to check it for multiple values, then you can do it this way.
okay. Thank you.
All right. So the concept is clear. Now, if you understand this, basically you exceed governor limits. So we have understood, right? Salesforce actually, they being words biggest CRM, they are actually not gonna put you in a situation where you are given such tight limits that you will not be able to execute the program that you want. All that they want to do here is they just want to ensure that you are not writing it in the wrong way. Otherwise, see, what would happen here? Instead of this 500, this could happen 1000 also. If there is no governor limit, then what happens? This update statement keeps on happening. So there is an update statement happening after for every one record, right? If this loop runs 1000 times, 1000 update statements are getting executed. What is happening in that case? In that case, this entire, it's not only Salesforce performance which is getting affected, your performance is also getting affected. Got it? So that is the thing. To ensure that people start writing the program in the right way, these are given. For example, think about it. If you have to carry a few things from one place to other place, right? Are you gonna just take one thing and then go keep it, then again come back? It's gonna take more time. It's gonna you are gonna get exhausted pretty quickly. But if you do a collection of things and then you carry them all together at once, that's gonna make life easy for you, right? The same thing happens with the program also. If you ask your program that go and enter the data for one record, perform one DML statement, again come back, then your program actually takes longer to execute whatever code or operation. So that is the thing. So it's always a good habit to kind of bulkify your SQL queries. Don't waste your SQL queries unnecessarily, because that's again important for the performance of your program, right? And if you are not doing it yourself, Salesforce will make sure that they actually enforce this on you. So now see, even if you write this program, for example, if you write it this way, the wrong way, You try, you test this program, your program will look fine. Maybe you tested it with 5 records. So in 5 records, it's not gonna exceed. But the moment it is deployed to the customer, and when the customer is actually trying to do it for 500 records, then it will throw error, right? So that is the reason why you should these governor limits are actually put in, so that you can actually try test properly against the governor limit, so that your customer does not face the error very frequently. So that actually helps you build a good customer relationship also for your own clients or customers. All right.
Thank you.